So what is a foreign key constraint? So foreign key is essentially a field in database table that is the primary key in any other table. So for example, we have two tables, for example, employees and departments, right? So in the employee table, we will have an employee ID, which will be the primary key for employee table. And in the department table, we will have a column called department ID, which will be the primary key for department table, right? So when we reference any of these tables, for example, we are using the department ID column in the employee table, right? So that means the department ID in employee table will become the foreign key for the employee table. It will be referencing primary key from department table. Let's see the example of that. So again, a foreign key constraint is a field in a database table that is a primary key in another table. So the foreign key creates a relationship between two tables, and this relationship is called as referential integrity, which we discussed a few minutes back. And the first table contains a primary key and the second table contains a foreign key. Syntax is same. So the constraint name, this time you have to use the references keyword to let it know from which table it should create the foreign key link, how it should link to the other table. So let's see how it works. So we will create two tables here. Foreign key, right? So table, let's say employees. I have employee ID int, which is primary key. We have employee name, which is varchar 20. We have employee salary, which is salary, which is int, and then we have department ID, which is again int. Constraint fk department ID references department ID. So this is on the employee table, and before creating this employee table, let me create one more table, department. It should have department ID as int and primary key, and then let's say we have department name. Let's give it varchar 20. Right, so we created two tables. First table is create table department. Cannot type data type varchar. Okay, the second table is employee. So what happened when we created this employee table? We created a foreign key on this department ID column, right, which we named as foreign key department ID. And what we referenced department tables department ID. So this reference is pointing to this particular column, right? So as we saw the definition, the foreign key in one table should be the primary key in the other table. So department ID is the primary key in department table, and since we are using this department ID column in employees table, so we need to make a link between these two tables to maintain the referential integrity, and hence we have created a foreign key relationship on department ID column in employee table by referencing the department ID column in the department table. So clear on how we created the foreign key relationship between these two tables? Clear on this? Hello?
Yeah, yes, Bhaiya. Sorry, I was in mute. I am saying clear, but it wasn't mute. Sorry.
Okay. So let's say we have department. Let's insert some values in department tables first, right? So let's create 3 departments. Department ID bring unique primary key. We need to give unique values. So let's say first is finance and then engineering departments. Let's insert these 3 values. So we have some data in department table now. Let's select and see those. Department. So we have 3 departments created. Now let's insert some data into the employee table. So first is employee ID, employee name, let's say Paul, salary 10,000, then department ID. So department ID, let's say 201. So let's insert 4 employees. This employee ID being a primary key should be unique. So let's give unique values. So let's have their same salaries. So this works on 3 and 4, right? So we have 3 departments. Now let's try to insert some data into the employee table. So incorrect syntax, insert into employee
values.
Okay. So this record got inserted. If I do a select star from employee, I should see that record. Okay.
Yes.
So
second also will be inserted.
Second inserted.
Third inserted. Fourth will fail.
Fourth will fail. Why fourth failed?
It is the reference value 204 is not present in the department.
Correct. So we have a referential integrity, right? So when we have a foreign key relationship, right? So in this case, department ID is a foreign key which is referencing this department table. So any value which is not present in this department table in department ID column cannot be inserted in employee table. So this is one classic example in warehouse solutions. So we have facts and dimensions in data warehouse.
Yeah, correct,
right?
Correct.
So what is a fact table? There is a star schema that we use, right? So there will be multiple dimensions, all pointing to a single fact column. And the dimension tables will be having multiple primary keys, and all those primary keys will become foreign key in the fact table. So in our ETL load process, we always load the dimensions first, because if the dimension table's primary key are not loaded, when we try to load the fact table, and if any of the key is missing in dimension table, it will fail. For the same reason we saw here, right? Because we are trying to insert department ID as 204, but this 204 is not present in this department table. For example, if I now insert one more record in this department table by the ID 204 and give the department name as R&D department, right? So now if I try to insert this record, it will get inserted. And if I do a select star, I see all these 4 records now. So because this 204 was not present earlier in department table, it could not insert it. But as soon as I inserted a department, it got the value. So this is an example of late arriving dimensions. So in production, sometimes what will happen, the fact table will get the data. For example, this employee table is a fact table. It gets the record. This is a valid record. We cannot ignore this. But since there was no record in the dimension table department in this case, this record would fail. It will not get inserted. Right? So this is called as late arriving dimensions, or early fact. Means the record came in fact table before it could come in the dimension table.
Okay.
Right. So that is the example. So we call it as late arriving facts. So late arriving dimensions, which means the fact data came first and dimension data is yet to come. Or early facts, means the fact data came before the dimension data could have come. into the table. So that is why in any ETL data warehousing projects, you will always see the dimension tables are loaded first, and then we load the fact tables. And this
Yeah,
is
the
for the
interviews are asking, yeah, that question. Which one is
yeah,
first loaded and which schema
correct.
you are using? Snowflake or
Correct. They will
Star,
ask the
how you
schema
design
and
it.
which one is loaded first. And this is the exact reason we load the dimensions first, because there is a referential integrity in place. And we need to have the data in dimensions for the facts to successfully get loaded. Right. So
Correct.
this is on the inserts. Right. Now what happens? Now I have to delete the employee with employee ID 104, for example. Right. So
Okay.
delete
That's
from employee where employee ID
good.
equal to 104. Will it get deleted?
I think
It
yes,
got deleted,
it's
right?
deleted. Yes.
Let's insert it again. This time I want to delete the department 204. So delete from department where department ID equal to 204. Will this work? It gave an error, right? Because it
Error.
says the delete statement conflicted with the reference constraint FK department ID. So FK department ID is what? This foreign key which we created, right? So what happens
Okay.
when you have a foreign key which is linking to a primary key from a different table? You cannot delete any data from this table until and unless the record or the integrity is present in the employee table where this particular column is used as a foreign key. So we could not delete this 204 from department table because this 204 is used in this record in employee table. There is a reference, right? This value is
Yes.
currently referencing to this value. So you cannot delete. But if you do this, if you delete this record, now if I do a select star from employee table, I don't have any employees for department 204. Now the integrity broke. So there is no employee in employee table working for this department. So this primary key is not linked to any foreign key in this table. Now if I want to delete this department, it works. Right?
Yes.
So whenever you have a primary key foreign key relationship, if you want to delete any data from the primary key table, you need to make sure first the foreign key value or the foreign key records for that particular value which you want to delete are deleted from the table first. So in this case of fact and dimensions, you need to delete the data in fact first, then only you can delete it from the dimension tables because of the integrity. So this is how foreign key works, and this is the relationship between primary key and foreign key, right? So as long as there is a referential integrity, like for example, now 203 is still linked to this employee 103. If I try to delete the department 203, I will not be able to do it because there is a referential integrity in place. This value is linked to this value. Right? There is a employee in this department. So I try to delete it, it will not work. But as soon as I delete the employee, which is employee ID 103, if I delete this employee, now the integrity broke. So this employee is not there. So this department doesn't have any foreign relationship with this particular employee table. And when I delete it now, it deletes. Right? So to insert, you have to first make sure primary key table has the data, then only foreign key table can insert the value. But in delete, it is reverse. First, you have to delete from the foreign key table, then only you can delete it from the primary key table. Right?
Yes, fine.
So in terms of facts and dimensions, so if you want to delete any data from dimension table, you need to first delete it from the fact table. Right? But if you want to insert anything in fact table, you need to make sure the value is already inserted in the dimension table. So that is how primary key and foreign key relationship works.